but people will be joining over the next few, and then we'll get started shortly. All right, why don't we begin? Might as well. So yeah, everybody, thanks very much for joining. Today we're going to talk about how Dawid, who's kindly joined, is orchestrating a bunch of really cool multi-tenant DBT projects, and we're also gonna touch a little bit on some of the latest Orchestra announcements, which is all around how we now have state management enabled. So yeah, lots of stuff to cover. It'll be about half an hour. So yeah, I guess let's crack on. So Dawid, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, why not? Thank you, Hugo. Thanks, Orchestra team, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us and giving me a chance to introduce myself and to give you a brief overview of what I've been doing in the last few years. Over 10 years of experience working with data, but in the last couple of years working as a self-employed founder of Pinnamin Analytics here in Barcelona. And the last 2 years especially, I've been building some really cool multi-tenant DBT projects that I really wanted to share, and also to highlight how Orchestra helped me not having to deploy multiple deployments of Airflow, which was really cool. So yeah, looking forward to speaking with you all and answering any questions that you have.
And it's crazy that we're here, because I remember we first met at the DBT meetup in Barcelona, what, like 2 years ago?
Three
years
years ago.
Mad. So back then Orchestra was just an idea, and I had blonde hair, not grey. So cool. So I guess Elia Caravello, talk to us about these wonderful.
Yeah, Alea currently is one of the best performing online casino games aggregators, and they support, now it's over 200 different providers and operators and game developers as well. And they combine the tenant specific logic. They aggregate different APIs to allow online casinos to connect to one. Aggregators these days are the cornerstone of online, not only gaming, but in general, to aggregate different sources. It's the same as for our data, right? The data ingestion tools, they deal with specific APIs, but we get only one interface. And Alea is that kind of interface to communicate between casinos and the game providers. Really a lot of data happening in Alea, hundreds of millions of transactions a day that we need to process in real time and then take care of analytics. With Alea, we've been rebuilding the system to also allow the multi-project dependencies, because the core processing, especially, it's very crucial and delicate, which we didn't really want to have everything in one place. Caravello is a travel subscription platform that works with a lot of different airlines and travel sector. For Caravello, the important part was to create proper multi-tenant data isolation system. Even though it wasn't required by law or by GDPR, it was required by the tenants themselves, which means that all the pipelines, all the databases, even the DBT projects are separate for each tenant in case, so that even if there's a mistake or there's a problem with data, it doesn't affect other tenants. So this was the crucial part of Caravello implementation, that it's completely isolated between different tenants.
Got it. And in the case of Caravello, a tenant is basically an airline, right?
A travel industry client, yes, because it's not necessarily airlines, but in most cases, yes. But yes, this was, although sometimes it could lead to one client wanting to have products as a different tenants as well, because they might have different payment systems, they might have different subscription programs. And so this is, for now, the definition is a client equals tenant, but actually the tenant in a technical terminology will mean it's a completely it's a data separation layer.
Got it. Got it. And what are the different tenants in the Alea context?
So that Alea doesn't necessarily work with the tenants per se. This is more about the internal projects. So to separate the thematic projects around what kind of data we deal with, you could think about them as sometimes revenue streams, sometimes the types of data, or even the different APIs that Alea exposes to their clients. And we get the data through different APIs, and dealing with that data is in separate chunks. For example, a financial project is a completely separate project in Alea because it's very extensive, it's very complex, and it's supposed to be completely independent from core processing.
Got it. Okay, yeah, it's interesting because it's like, you know, with Caravello, it's almost like the need for splitting up those different domains is driven by, you know, like client requirements and client separation, similar to, I guess, if, you know, you're working in like, you know, like analytics for like almost like third-party analytics. So like if you were an analytics provider providing analytics for different companies, whereas in Alea, it's almost like they've got the, you know, like the large organization problem. It's like different tenants, different domains, different
similar solution for two slightly different aspects. Yeah.
Very cool. All right, let's move on. So I guess before we started chatting, there are a few challenges you faced.
Yes, definitely. The challenges, some of the challenges are shared between the clients, some of them are specific, but in general, one of the first one, apart from, like you mentioned, client necessity to be separate, it was also about access to the code base and the teams that work on different code bases and different projects. In both cases, the requirement was, okay, the data team is the core. The data team makes all the decisions. The data team approves it. But we, and I mean the company, wanted to open up the development of models, of maybe LookML dashboards, anything that could be improved with AI coding as well, a little bit. They wanted to allow other people to at least have a go at it and say, okay, you still the guardians of the code base, but we want other people to at least get interested in it. And this was necessary because different teams will have access to different code bases, whether it's a tenant or it's a project. That was a requirement. And these days, access per files or per folders in GitLab or GitHub or Bitbucket, they're pretty much non-existent. If they are and I don't know about it, it's not as well known. So for us, it was also about the access, so that not everyone has access to all the code, and that we can decide which teams have ability to access what code bases.
Heavy governance angle.
Very heavy, yes. The second one, yes, the cross-project dependencies. This was also, there's a bit of a difference because in Caravello we use a core project as a package, so it's actually installable in the tenant packages, whereas in Alea, it's the output of each project can be shared across different projects. And it sounds complex, but actually it turned out to be much more manageable because if we need to change something in the financial project, we don't touch anything else, and it's much more secure. Even from CI/CD perspective, from coding and from access as well, and allows us also to quickly tear down something that's not needed. That was one of the requirements, where we have a project, we want to create a couple of 20 or 50 models, but let's say in a year it's not going to be moving forward. Then it's very easy to tear down the database, the code base, the project in Looker, because Looker modeling, it's also mapped to the DBT projects. Everything is mapped to the same pattern. And the pipeline changes, yes, of course. The orchestration, when I started thinking about orchestrating it in GitLab Actions, for example, this was not easily achievable, mostly because this is where chaining becomes crucial. When we have multi-project or multi-tenant, the data ingestion and orchestration of DBT to be linked became really crucial. We couldn't just count on airbyte jobs to finish in 20 minutes or 5. No, we needed to have this linked. And also there are cross-project dependencies, which means sometimes this project needs to run after this one. And this was really important. Orchestra, a couple of clicks, solved it beautifully, which I really liked. And yeah, both companies are really happy with how it works and how easily we could do it.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe let's get on to some of those examples. I know there are a few people here though that are probably thinking like, you know, why not just have everything in one big repo, right? You mentioned that pattern in Caravello where they have the top level core project that sort of imports all the other projects. Like maybe we could talk about some of those reasons that we didn't do that in this case.
Yeah. So actually, for Caravello, we chose a hybrid approach a little bit, which means the actual tenant projects are in one repository, but the core internal analytics and other separate projects are in different ones. Mostly the reason for it was mostly access. We only allow other teams to access the tenants projects where they will be able to write extensions to models that are in core. And that was the key. That was the key to, okay, we don't need them to be separate, but we can't keep everything in a monolithic repository because we wouldn't be able to limit the access of people to which files they are able to work with. And that was the key. Got it.
Just in terms of like scale, like roughly how many models are the two pipelines that you've got going on here, or two setups?
Right now we're gonna probably 120, maybe 150, something like that. In one of them, because the system has been handed over as well, there's probably a lot more now.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Cool. Alrighty. So let's get on to some of the examples. All right. So this is a layers setup.
Yes. So in this example, this was about the different DBT projects and how they interact with each other. This is a little bit of a simplification, because there's a lot of new projects coming on all the time, and it was key to be able to configure this as well, so that I don't have to select specific models for example, one DBT project, but to know that one task is basically responsible for one project, and it has its own credentials, it has its own connection. And I can use environments in Orchestra to also run this pipeline, for example, in development, or even run just one task. So dependencies are not the project dependencies as packages in DBT in this setup. It means we don't install the projects within DBT. We just use the output of one or more of the projects in the downstream project. And in this case, I also see exactly how the data flows, what I need from different projects, what are the dependencies. But most of all, if one task fails, for example, the downstream builds, it's not going to impact the upstream models. This was very important to us to see this clearly, how we can how the data flows.
Yeah, fantastic. So I guess maybe just to double click a bit on what we're seeing here. So this first step is sort of like a simplified ingestion step, and then each one of these containers is triggering a DBT command for a specific project.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's very cool. So essentially, we're saying that, you know, after the ingestion's done, we're going to run these two DBT projects in parallel, and then those two all being well, we then do these ones.
And in big projects like this, of course, the first intention was, okay, we can use selectors, we can use tags, we can use folders in the same project, but yeah. I don't see this, for example, in this view. I would have to click every single time in a task and remember, oh, this is the model, this is the tag. Whereas keeping the project separate means, okay, I know what models are in each project and what's running.
Yeah, would be a great candidate for some of the state-aware orchestration. All right, cool. I know we've got this slide as well. I think it's just here for a little bit more detail. Maybe not want to go into too much detail in, but I guess is there anything like, are there any interesting multi-tenant considerations about what we've got on screen? Maybe I can try to illustrate.
Yeah, I will simplify that. This is something that's ongoing in the implementation, where I want to combine the different projects might require different orchestration triggers, some on an hourly basis, on daily basis, even on monthly basis. Anyone familiar with external tables package in DBT, they will know that sometimes it's only required to refresh it every month. So the idea later on is to combine those requirements into even one pipeline that, yes, it will look a bit more complex, but it will give me, for example, the visibility of the whole platform. So this is almost like the pipeline of pipelines, as I call it, and it will require the sensors and triggers, because the ingestion, sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's hourly, and the same with different projects. So the idea is in the future to combine it all. Got it.
Yeah, no, super cool. And I guess in terms of how you've managed to trigger and set everything up, like we can see there are obviously a lot of complex dependencies on this graph. How have you found doing that in Orchestra?
Very easy, mostly because of the sensors and the trigger constraint, the trigger variables that allow me to specify that this task only runs if it's the first day of the month, and it's visible in the pipeline as well. That made it very easy to even be able to create this concept, rather than having a list of 20 pipelines and remember, or even use the naming. Okay, I have to remember that this runs hourly, this runs daily. But the key is to connect them all, that if something runs daily, if the daily fails, there's no point running hourly, because that means something's missing. And this allows me to connect it all and basically this is to stop processing if there are gaps. There's no point processing something hourly if the first thing fails. Yeah. And this was able to be achieved here.
Yeah, how much has it helped in terms of just like things like how long things are running for, reliability, like underlying warehouse cost, out of interest?
Sorry?
Like how has having this orchestration helped with some of the like underlying warehouse costs and pipeline reliability and stuff like that?
Well, in mostly the visibility of and even graphical representation is much better, because before, in at least in Alea's case, it was in the snowflake tasks.
Okay.
In the other company, everything was triggered through GitLab actions. So the key is that I can almost see the diagram that I have here, and I can translate it exactly into graphical representation Orchestra. We are all visual animals, and when I show a CTO or someone else and I say, hey, this is how our project runs, I don't even have to say anything. I don't have to say that this project depends on this, depends on this. No, it's already there. The lines and the arrows say everything that they need. And that was the key. The chaining, so it's the linking of the other jobs, unless you have some very sophisticated Airflow deployment or something like that, which also takes time. In other tools, it's not as easy. And that was the key, to not wait unnecessarily, and to be able to be prepared that if something runs for a little longer, then we don't trigger something before it finishes. Yeah.
Cool. And like, do you remind me, do you have like any technical resources like in the data team supporting you in these cases, or are you like the sole platform engineer?
In 95% of the time, it's me.
That's mad. Fair. Cool. All right. Maybe let's talk very quickly about how you set up the connections, because I think that's probably an interesting concept that might be new to some people listening.
So the connections, as you can see, this is also per project. Each project is completely isolated as well, which means apart from the user, which is the same, it does use different roles, different warehouses for Snowflake to be able to look at the costs, and in here, of course, to be able to use the environments and run the CI/CD much more easily, because it uses the credentials, and then it's easier to set up the tasks that I just select. Okay, this task is for the analytics project. This one is for finance. So this was extremely useful and easy to set up, to not have to switch in between. You could also have just one and have different profiles, but in this case, I wanted the connection to be separate, so that there is not. So even if by mistake you use environment variable of the wrong project and you try to run the wrong model, it's not going to run because it doesn't have access to the database of a different project. So these little details that might sometimes seem unnecessary, it just gives you that extra couple of % that even an accidental mistake, it's not going to work.
Yeah. I think it's just so key, right? So for anyone still wondering, in Orchestra, a connection is basically like a dbt profiles.yaml, so a bit like a connection in Airflow. But then what we're looking at here is a mapping of those connections to an environment variable. So let's say for a given project, you needed to have a separate set of connections for connecting to your production databases, and then a separate set of connections for like your staging databases. You then have like one environment variable called like dbt connection, or in this case, like the core connection, the analytics one, the finance one, and then you basically build those out in the production environment, but also in the staging environment, and then you can do this. But yeah, David, do you want to maybe touch quickly on the CI/CD and how that all works?
This one, it's connected through Bitbucket variables as well, which means in the Bitbucket pipeline, the code automatically detects because they're separate repositories. It sends a specific variable to Orchestra which project to test, which means I don't have to have 4 pipelines and trigger specific pipeline. I can trigger one pipeline with a variable, and that variable is used in the trigger conditions for each project, which means at least all my CI/CD projects as well are in one pipeline. It's also to keep it clean. Also, if you have a lot of different pipelines, keeping it in one, it's just much easier to manage. And then when I have new projects, I just add new projects there with a new trigger condition, and I can have one pipeline that runs CI/CD for all the projects.
Yeah, super cool. What are the types of things that you're parameterizing from Bitbucket? I guess the branch would be one, right? Because you need to run the CI/CD on the branch of the PR or whatever.
Yes. In this case, it's a bit easier because the project is always contained. But for example, in the Caravella project, it's much more complex because we have the package. So if we're testing a package, the core package on its own, it's not, let's say, it's not runnable. You can't run the package because it doesn't have a connection. You need to run it on an example tenant. And that was much more complex, where I needed to send a variable of the core project branch, also the other branch of the tenant, and select specific tenant to run it on the development environment.
Okay.
So it's working really well because you can also select which tenants you want to test it on. Maybe, this is something that will be tested on A and B, and this one on C and D. You can do it through GitLab labels. And those labels are passed to Orchestra, and Orchestra filters, okay, I'm only running A, now I'm running C, now I'm running B and D. Because not every single code will be switched on for every tenant, but it has to be in like a repository package.
That's so cool. I didn't even know you were doing that. That's very cool. Awesome. Okay, this is a slide on environments. I think I jumped the gun a bit on that. I guess maybe we could talk about a little bit of Caravella.
So in Caravella's case, it was a little bit different. There are also a few projects, but most of all, it was about the tenants. So the tenants in, let's say, 95% share the code base. And before, they were all in one DBT project. But sometimes we incorporate data from public open data or even exchange data with the tenants. And you never know what can come through that channel. Right. And one of the biggest requirements was any problems or errors with data for one tenant cannot have an impact on another. If everything is in one database, one table, one project, it can have an impact, which means we didn't want to also repeat the project, because writing the same SQL, copy, paste. So that's where the idea of actually creating a package where all the, let's say, a repository of models exists. And then for each tenant, you can enable which models you want to run. And everything is mapped to a tenant specific isolated, let's say, environment, which means a whole database is different, folder in a repository, connection, users, everything. In terms of the top level orchestration, it is pretty simple because it's airbyte, Redshift, Orchestra. But like I said, the biggest challenge here was that the project of the repository of models, or the core as I call it, this was not run on its own. So you have to use a tenant to test the core when you make a change to a core, and that was the key difference.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Is the data that's landing in this architecture like quite reliable, or is it like very messy data?
99% is reliable. It's only the data that might be exchanged with the tenants. Each tenant might have different ways of sending the same kind of data. And that's why we also needed the isolation to be able to process some of the data that we receive from them just differently.
Nice. Amazing. Cool. Okay. Takeaways.
Yes, main things is that one DBT project doesn't scale and is dangerous. At the beginning, when you think about a project in terms of 20 models, 3 folders, 2 schemas, maybe that will work. But the moment you have to start diverging it, it's much harder to split it into different categories later on when it's already gargantuan, rather than start slower but already split. And this already proves to be the case, because in both companies there's a lot of tenants, a lot of projects, and right now, remember, it might take a little bit more time to set it up. So let's say when there's a new project in Alea, I need to set up new database, new set of credentials, keys. Yeah, takes a couple of hours, but then it's fully functional on its own. Whereas, so I'm maybe spending a little bit more time at the beginning in order to save a lot of headaches in the future.
Mm.
In terms of the multi-project architecture, and it's required, this was an example in Caravelle where it wasn't just our idea, it was actually required by the clients. Many times I was told by the CTO that this is a requirement coming from them, that they wanted to be separate, and it even connectivity that is separate, different users, different passwords, makes sure that even if someone by accident would like to run model on the wrong database, they wouldn't be able to, because there are no permissions. So these might be 0.001% chance, but that 0.01% chance might be crucial when it happens. In this case, we remove this completely. And of course, the orchestration, coordinating these dependencies in anything like GitHub Actions or GitLab Actions, or any kind of pipelines that you only see the code, it's not great. The visual representation is really important to be able to also show and present how the data systems work, which I do on a regular basis, but also be able to configure. So that's why the CI/CD with the trigger conditions in Orchestra, it was a game changer and a time saver.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to hear, and I think it's just so impressive, right? What you've been able to do as a sort of like one-man band for both of these companies. I do. Part of me does still wonder what it would be like if some of those sort of hard and fast, I guess, governance and compliance requirements weren't there, because obviously that pattern of having many domains with their own sort of sub DBT project, if you like, but still all in one repo, can obviously work, but perhaps, well, yeah, obviously not here.
I think the repository, it's usually the main question that everyone asks, and different types of architects also have this conversation. And I would say you can still have everything isolated and separated. That's true. You can have still different profiles, different DBT projects, but just in one repository, right? You could. Yeah, that's probably the one thing that you could change. For me, dealing with multiple repositories, it's easier, because when I create a pull request, when I interact with the code, I know I'm interacting only with the code for this project. Again, that's important. Even if it's a separate DBT project in the same repo, I know that it's just that repo. And if you don't pay for a number of repositories, I think it's okay to have multiple ones. And the second bit is the access. It's access to the code that we cannot govern if everything is in one monorepo. You could probably do it via some very complex pipelines that PRs are rejected if the file belongs to this folder. Yes, you could. You can always make it more complex. But in this case, the ability to be able to change access to different repositories is much easier than managing it through code.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I mean, look, it'll be interesting to see how AI affects all of this, because obviously agents are great when you give them access to all of your code in one place, but sounds like that definitely won't be an option here. All right, cool. Well, look, that is what we had prepared for you all. So I'm going to open up the field to some questions. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little chat window. So if anyone has any questions, now is your time. Don't be shy. Who's going to go first? Right, well, maybe I'll kick us off then, Dawid, with a question about AI. Like, how are you seeing tools like Claude affect how you're managing and maintaining these DBT projects?
For me personally, the AI, at least the area where I used it the most was the places where I don't have as much expertise in. So for example, the YAML pipelines in Bitbucket, for example, something like that. That was very helpful because I could at least get a boilerplate, and then I can dive into the code because I know the YAML, I know the APIs. I've come from a developer's background, even though it's poor PHP, not Python or anything, but still. However, it at least helped me to not having to learn all the basics. I just saw the code and I was like, okay, I have to change this because this variable is not really working. So for that was very useful. For writing the DBT models, I am still a bit skeptical because yes, you can write the as some people call staging models. I call them base models, where you just perform the basic conversions, or like some other people call it the bronze layer, right? You could probably use that because that's very simple processing. But anything else requires business logic. And if you have complex business logic, and in some of those projects, believe me, the logic never stops coming, it's impossible to feed the logic to AI for it to output a model. So I think the writing itself needs the business logic to be in your head. Even if you give the AI this logic, the problem is that sometimes even the people, the non-technical people, can't really convey the logic just by writing. It's sometimes hours of conversations and me translating it into paper. So I'm working almost as an AI.
Well, at least you're converting it into paper, and hopefully that paper can get fed into an agent at some point, and then maybe it'll be as good at writing models as we all are. Maury asks, do you have references or examples for setting up the multi-DBT project architecture?
I do not have it. However, this is something that I want to write about. I have some stuff prepared where I want to show people exactly the process that I followed, especially with the two different approaches. So one as a package dependency, and another one just as a project dependency of the output, because I think it's really interesting, and yeah, I will definitely have some examples for people.
I guess maybe to rephrase the question slightly, Dawid, like if you were going into like another client and they were asking you to set up like a multi-tenant DBT project with like a few internal business domains, like what are the high level steps you'd go about to sort of set that up?
So nowadays the top level questions are around access, so around the code bases. Second, it's the data isolation depending on the industry. Some industry, I worked in medical industry in London. I worked for finance industry as well, and there are different layers of needs, right? Which means the industry itself already tells me what I'm going to have to deal with, even if sometimes the company doesn't know itself. And sometimes it is the case. It's like, no, we have to keep it separate. We have to do it this way. especially for medical and financial institutions. It's crucial. It's almost a non-brainer, which means this already tells me some things, but also around the access, around the teams that are going to interact with the DBT project. Like I mentioned, more and more companies want other people to be involved in some SQL development because they already use SQL, maybe in analysis, maybe through BI. So these are definitely the two questions, and also the speed, because I'm always trying to tell people, if this is a long-term project that is going to scale a lot, it's best to put some more time in the foundations right now, and then have peace of mind later, than rush right now and pay that price later on.
Yeah, I think practically, like the sort of steps that we've seen people take outside of this is like exactly as you say. Like the first thing is definitely liaising with the business to work out what everybody needs. And then, the second thing I would say is probably getting those, like those DBT projects set up, but then also, I guess, making sure that the underlying infrastructure in whatever warehouse you're using is set up, right? It's like, you probably start with a version of production data, but then, what are you going to use for your staging data, right? It's like, should it just be a copy of production? Probably. Like, does it need to be something else? That may depend. So you've got to set up those databases and schemas and whatnot first, second. And then, really from there are like a lot of questions that you would maybe have to ask if you were having, like a framework that wasn't an Orchestra, right? Because Orchestra, would sort of give that all for you, and then we've got all of those deployment steps outlined in our docs. But if it was something like an Airflow, you'd be saying, well, okay, well, do I use Airflow? Do I use another orchestrator? How am I going to deploy it? Do I go managed service? Do I go Kubernetes? Like, like how's that going to interact with Git? How am I going to do CI/CD? Like, how do I hook that up with my observability or cataloging tool? You know what I mean? So the list of questions can be very long. Cool. Well, we have lots of questions now. So thank you very much, Maury, because now everyone's more forthcoming. So Jose asks, how easy has it been to maintain the multi-DBT project architecture?
Okay, so let's nothing is easy in the world of data. Let's be honest, right? But that's why we like it. We like the challenges. I'd say if you like the structure, and you definitely need to have time for it. So I wouldn't say that very complex projects like this is something that you can implement, let's say, in a very fast-moving startup where projects and products come and go every month. For me, it's extremely easy, because easiness doesn't mean it's slow. It just means it's thoughtful. When I have a change, I know exactly where I need to change it now, because it's not like, oh, which folder it is, which model. No, it's like, this is a financial change, financial business logic. I know I'm going to finance project where I have already maybe only 20 models, not 200, if I take the whole landscape for a company. Yes, when you develop something and it has dependencies later on, of course, you have to run the CI/CD. You have to be aware of it, but like I said, the advantages of it is that you isolated to only this project. It might take a little bit more time, but I think it's a matter of getting used to it. Because when you have, I don't know, your shelves with these kind of books, and you know exactly to what shelf you go to, already your scope is limited. You don't have to be aware of everything. I don't have to be aware of my core processing when I'm making a change for exchange rates for finance, for example. And so easiness, it's there. But getting used to the fact that it's not just all in one big folder, that might take some time.
I guess that's the distinction, isn't it, between like the person trying to make the company go faster, but then also, yourself as the platform architect that needs to know where all the bodies are buried. But okay, I know we're a little hot up on time, so I'm gonna whiz through these. Will you be implementing state-aware orchestration for Alea and Caravello?
I think yes. I'm going to take a look at it next week, and I think this will be helpful in some cases, in some of the projects, not necessarily all of them, but in some projects that especially deal with slowly changing data. I think this will be useful.
Nice. Yeah, I look forward to seeing it on Redshift. Manza asks, does a multi-tenant project have a single repo or a multi-repo? I guess the answer is it depends, but in these cases,
so for
multi-repo.
So for multi-project, it's always separate. But for multi-tenant, the thing was that the projects were separate, but the tenants themselves were in one.
Got it.
So it was a hybrid approach, actually.
Yeah. So basically one repo, but multiple projects in that same repo, DPT projects, and then one project corresponding to this definition of a tenant.
Yeah.
And then Paul asks, did either Alea or Caravello?
Oliver as well.
Oh yeah, I'm skipping. I'm taking the best for last.
Okay.
Paul asks, did you have to do any like porting or like, I guess, migration from like one big project to like the multi-project architecture?
So in both cases, the decision was fairly simple to start from scratch, but to use the projects that existed, which means we also moved the data sources in some ways. So I built it in a complete isolation, mostly because the old systems, they had to run. So I couldn't really change it in place.
Everything was already split up under like.
So it was in complete isolation. So the new system, so then I can validate the new systems with the old systems, which means in this case, all I had to do is kind of translate the business logic and the complexities and try to unravel it and make it a bit simpler.
Data work. And I guess final one then. With these two projects, would you have done anything differently?
Honestly, not really. Everything is working really well. I'm happy. So no, I don't think I would do. Maybe in terms of the Git vendor.
The Git vendor.
Yeah, because I'm working with Bitbucket with GitLab. I remember working with GitHub, and it was a bit easier.
Interesting. Well, apparently there's a new GitHub being built specifically for agents. So maybe on our next project we can try that one out.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Well, look, this has been great. Please, very big virtual clap for Dawid. That was super interesting and very enlightening. We are 5 minutes over, but I think I speak for everyone in that this has been absolutely brilliant webinar. I think everyone's been super engaged. So yeah, like big clap. Thank you very much, Dawid.
Thank you everyone for joining.
And yeah, thank you very much everyone for joining. This is recorded. We'll upload it. So yeah, hope everyone has a great rest of the day, or great end to the day. And yeah, we will all see you soon. All right. Cheers.
Bye everyone.
Bye everyone.